march to protect the country's bees is taking place in London. Campaigners want the government to support a Europe-wide ban on a group of pesticides known as neonicotinoids. Well, the number of bees in England is falling faster than anywhere else in Europe. DEFRA estimates a fall of around 50% since the 1980s. The number of factors have all had a big effect on bee populations, including climate change, pesticides, and attacks by the parasitic varroa mite. Yet bees are responsible for pollinating 80% of our crops, and a third of all our food depends on their work. Without them, crops would shrink and our food choices would be severely limited. Well, in our central London studio is Amaral-Rogers, who's a pesticide campaigner at the nature conservation charity Bug Life. Good to talk to you, Vanessa. What evidence do we really have that these pesticides are killing our bees?
Well, there is a lot of evidence. There's been a number of studies for many years now that have been looking at the harmful effects that they have on not only bees, but also our wild pollinators, so things like bumblebees and other insects. And we do have a number of scientific studies, and we also have very good monitoring data from other countries which have shown that there's a correlation between neonicotinoid use and pollinator populations.
But Mark Walport, the UK's chief government scientist, says that yes, there is evidence that there's a link between neonicotinoids and bee death when tests are carried out under laboratory or semi-field conditions. But he says there's no measurable harm to bee colonies when they're exposed to these pesticides on farms, if the farms follow official guidelines.
Well, the problem is that we don't actually have that evidence. What we have is the pesticide companies, when they do their field trials, they sort of produce this apparent evidence to say that there's no risk to the environment, but then all that data is hidden in secrecy, so we aren't able to access it and see for ourselves.
So you're saying that you don't have the evidence that the bees are killed if these are used on farms?
This is what the pesticide companies are saying, but what we do have is semi-field trials where you can control all the variables and you can show that there is an effect. And like I said before, we have the monitoring data, which we don't have in the UK, but which we do have in other countries such as Italy, where they found that there was neonicotinoid use and pollinator declines. Then they put a ban in, and now honeybee colonies are thriving. And another thing is that there's no loss in yield, which is a really important thing, especially for the worries that our farmers have.
But don't you think you need to have proper field trials rather than semi-field trials and laboratory trials before you're able to say whether or not this is actually happening? Because as you say, you're saying that you don't have the information because the pesticide companies don't give it to you, but if you don't have the information yourselves, how can you actually say for a fact that this is actually what is happening to the bees?
But we do, that's what I'm saying, we do have this evidence that there are semi-field trials. The problem with doing a field trial is that once you put every information out there, that it's very difficult to control other variables. So, I mean, there was a recent study by DEFRA which tried to do the same thing for bumblebees and have a look in an actual field study. But what you ended up finding was that all the bumblebees were contaminated with neonicotinoids. So it sort of highlights the problem of doing a field trial and being able to 100% determine that neonics are the cause. We have these semi-field trials which show that there's an issue. We have very good data from other countries which shows that there is an issue, and we also have legislation in Europe. We have the precautionary principle which says if there's scientific uncertainty, then you have to put in a suspension or a ban.
Okay, there we'll leave it. Vanessa Amaral-Rogers, pesticide campaigner at Bug Life. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, another 62 people have been